Tahrir, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nabil Fahmi. I'm the Dean of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. And on behalf of the school, its faculty, its students, and the AUC community as a whole, it's really very happy to welcome you all here in another session of Tahrir Dialogues, which I believe are now somewhere about 79 different sessions, all of which started immediately after 2011 and has focused only on dealing with issues of importance to the public domain, and on occasion, when we had particularly distinguished speakers where we felt it was important to share their insights with our local audience and also to give them a bit of a flavor of what's happening in Egypt and what's on the mind of different Egyptians. We've had a tremendously successful record in doing that so far, and I'm happy that we're starting off this semester with a number of good sessions, and that today I'm able to host not only a close friend of more years than Dr. Telhami and I want to remember, but also, frankly, somebody who's a very distinguished scholar, a practitioner, somebody who's been both in the political, practical domain and also in the academic domain as well. He's also an expert on the Middle East, and I would say he's one of the few people that's listened to by all sides, even those who don't necessarily agree with him. Dr. Tahami is the professor at the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. He's the director of their polling unit there at the university. He is the Anwar Sadat Professor for Peace and Development, and he's a non-resident senior fellow at the Saban Center at Brookings Institute as well. We've invited him to join us today and to share with you some of his thoughts because he's a very astute reader of American politics, but also because he doesn't simply come to the table with opinions, although opinions are important and his are considered opinions, but he always comes to events, opinions, discussions with data. Part of his interest in polling is a function of that, but in many different circumstances, and I've known Shibli in different hats and capacities, he always starts with where are the facts, then what is the analysis to the facts, and then the projections if he feels ready to do that. We've asked Dr. Telhami today to speak about what's happening in America, and particularly as they move into the elections. It's a little bit early for the elections, but the election mode is already there. The Democrats have had a number of primaries, and President Trump has been running since the first day he came into office anyway, so it's that's been going on as well. And as you all know, these elections, those who support America, those who are critical of America, or those who are simply objective analysts, affect a lot of things happening around the world and therefore are among the most commonly followed elections and widely followed elections internationally. I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Tahami to speak, but let me also say that my colleague, Professor Karim Haggag, who's a member of the faculty at the School of Global Affairs, will also be the moderator of this event. Karim also has the experience in practical areas as well as in academia, and he's a serious follower of American politics. So I'm sure he'll manage the discussions in a very useful fashion, putting questions to Dr. Tahami and pushing him to come out with the secrets that he doesn't want to come out with just yet. Shibli, do you want to take the floor, or Karim, do you want to? Okay, fine. Go ahead.
Well, Masā al-Khair. I will speak in English, but obviously if you have questions in Arabic, you're more comfortable asking in Arabic, that's fine too. First of all, thank you so much for hosting me, Ambassador Fahmi. We have been friends for many years, but I can always say that Ambassador Fahmy is one of the most respected Egyptians in Washington and all around the world, and it's always a pleasure to be around you. It's also great to be with my friend Kareem. Kareem was highly admired in Washington as well during the years when he served there, and obviously has been doing a fantastic job at AUC. In fact, I'm here really for a conference that AUC put together that we participated in over the past 2 years with very rich conversations about regional security and economic development, and it's been a very good visit so far. So let me tell you what I will put on the table for you for a conversation, and I hope it is a conversation, so you might have some questions to ask, and I'm happy to engage you, and certainly Kareem will ask, but I will put some things on the table in describing my understanding of where we are in the American political process. We're, a year away from now, less than a year away from our own elections. As Ambassador and Dean Fahmy said, I head a center for public opinion polling in the U.S. So I constantly do public opinion polls. And not only, I certainly do it on foreign policy, like what do Americans think about the Middle East? What do Americans want to do about Israel-Palestine? What do Americans want to do about Iran? And any questions you have about that, by the way, particularly about how this will play in our elections, because foreign policy is not a major issue in the elections right now, but it could become so under certain circumstances. And there are some things that I might even say something about it toward the end of this conversation. But we do public opinion polls about the current situation inside, about what's driving American people. What are they focused on? What do they think of impeachment? What do they think of the political process? So we have a little bit of a view of where the public is. So I'm going to start by painting a little bit of a picture as I understand it, touching on, obviously somewhat superficially, but hopefully in a way that would draw you into a conversation. The first thing to note is that we are the most polarized we have ever been in America. That is, American politics have never been more polarized, meaning more divided. I have never seen it in my entire career, and I have been doing polling in America for 30 years, literally 30 years, actually a little bit more. The first poll I did was 1988. I have never seen this kind of division in America. We're more divided at home, by far, than we are divided with any other country in the world. Americans are more divided among themselves than they are divided with Egypt, than they are divided even with Russia, than they're divided even with China. And that's how deep the divide is. What does that divide mean? It's not even anymore Democrat and Republican. It is certainly that, but it's even beyond that. It's those who are for Trump and those who are against Trump. Because it used to be when you are the Democrat or Republican, that was sort of a description not only of a party affiliation, but a little bit of an ideological worldview. The Republicans have a particular worldview, the Democrats have a particular worldview, but right now, Trump transcends the worldview because Trump is Trump. He's not a traditional Republican, he's not a traditional ideological Republican, he's Donald Trump. And you're either for Donald Trump or against Donald Trump. How do we see that? For example, let me give you an example. So when we ask a question, do you support Trump's policy on immigration? You're going to have Republicans, 90% say, yes, I support them. And you're going to have 90% of Democrats say, no, I oppose them. 90% of almost half of the country say yes, and 90% say no. I mean, this is impossible as an objective divide. There's no way people in the same country can be so deeply divided of the opposite direction if they make objective analysis of the situation. So it's all about, are you for him or are you against him? That's where we are. And therefore, in some ways, that identity divide means that facts matter less. People are hardened. It's kind of an identity politics. You identify with the president, you just agree with him on everything, and you oppose him, then you oppose him on everything. And we've seen that in some ways having some fascinating effect. I've spoken last time about one effect, for example, on the role, on the attitudes toward Islam as a religion and Muslims. For example, as you know, Donald Trump, when he started talking with a lot of criticism of Islam and Muslims, the people around him have, kind of pushed a little bit more Islamophobic views. And yet, in all the polling we've done since he became a candidate till now, Americans have become progressively more and more and more favorable views of Muslims. That is, incrementally, every single poll we did since 2015, Americans have come to like Muslims more and more and more and more as as the rhetoric against Muslim increases. Why? Because most of that change was coming from Democrats and independents who opposed Trump. So if Trump doesn't like Muslims, we love them. It's not like some sudden transformation that has taken place. That has, by the way, even impacted, surprisingly, American public attitudes toward even the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where there used to be unanimity or more or less people closer to each other. Now you find Democrats are starting to lean more toward the Palestinians being much more critical of Israel, just as Republicans and Trump are actually throwing all the weight toward Israel. So it's a fascinating picture. That's the starting point. And I say that because then you have to ask the question, so if that's where we are, what is going to move the needle on the elections? What do we, we're now a divided country. There's you for Trump or against Trump. Trump obviously is going to be the Republican candidate. We don't yet know who the Democratic candidate will be. We have, a dozen Democratic candidates. They seem to be increasing by the day. Just over the past couple of weeks, we gained 2 new candidates. So what is going to move the needle one way or the other? What is this dependent on? So that's what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit, to just give you a flavor of the things that could move the needle one way or the other, given this polarization. Number one, you have aside from the public opinion polarization, you have a deep congressional polarization. You find that Republicans are sticking together and Democrats are sticking together almost with very, very little shift. One occasional, member of Congress will shift to one side or the other. And now, as you know, we're going through this impeachment process, which is very unusual. To put it bluntly, this is only the 3rd time in American history that is ever, there was a couple where it didn't really, was not carried out to the fullest, president resigning. But this is very unusual, and obviously a lot of information is being put on the table. Congress has been completely divided along partisan lines. Republicans are sticking with the president. Democrats are going against the president. There is no divide. Now, it's fascinating because a lot of people expected that what would happen in this particular case is when you have public hearings where you are talking about information that you're putting on the table, such as the president's conversation with the president of Ukraine, all of the president's aides are coming and speaking, or not all of them, many of them coming and speaking before Congress and in front of the American television. A lot of things that Americans don't like at all, a lot of things that are damning, a lot of things that people think are wrong, a lot of things that people think shouldn't be done by a president or anyone else. And yet, it hasn't shifted the congressional balance between the Republicans is sticking with the president completely, even people who privately say, I don't like him, people who privately say, I hate what he's doing. And we get reports, some of us get it directly from some members who say that. And so why are they sticking with him? So let me just tell you, there are two things. I group them into two groups. One group of Republicans who stick with the president are people who don't like him personally, don't like what he says, but they like the fact that Republicans are in power. They like the fact that he's appointing judges in the courts along the lines that they like, that's going to have impact for years to come, particularly young judges who are inclined to agree with the Republicans, not only at the Supreme Court level, at every level. And it's very, very important. This is maybe perhaps the most profound change that he's doing. They like what he's doing in pertaining to private schools. They like what he's doing to the bureaucracies. They may not like the bureaucracies themselves. They like the tax cuts that he's doing. So while they don't like everything else about him, they say, well, if the Democrats were in his place, then we wouldn't have all these good things. So people will protect him, not just, are afraid of him, they protect him because of the outcome. But there is a second set of people, it's hard to know which one is the majority, who are fearful of him, who really don't like him being president, who really are a little bit even privately embarrassed by him, who probably can't look their children in the eyes and say, I support this president. Why are they fearful of him? Because what we have is a president who is a very populist president, who has mastered the social media, who has created a direct connection between him and his core supporters in the Republican Party. He has a direct relationship, and he has persuaded them that he's the man for them. And therefore, to the extent that he maintains it, he doesn't even have to maintain 90% support. If he maintains majority support, people who stick with him, if you have one member of Congress who criticizes him, then he can activate their own constituency against that member, and they lose in the election, and none of them want to lose. So that's why the formula in that game is, if you have one or two members going against the president, they will always lose among Republicans. They will always lose because he'll turn their constituency against them just like that. In one tweet, he can defeat them. However, if 10 members go together, or most of them go together, they defeat him. But it takes a lot to get to that critical mass of people that will turn against him. So what is that dependent on? Are they sensitive to information? There were a lot of Democrats who were hopeful that if you have the hearings being public, then it'll sway public opinion. What have we found? We have some information. Including a poll I just recently did about the Ukraine scandal and whether, in fact, it had moved the needle against the president. Here's what we found. It does make a difference. Because you see, people who say we have polarization, that polarization applies to the vast majority of people on each side. But then you've got a lot of people, even if it's only 5% or 10% who are movable, that's a lot of people because that can sway the outcome. That's all you need. You don't need, and yes, in all indication, we have people who are swayed by the revelations about the Ukraine conversation. We showed that in our poll. We showed that even among Republicans, we had up to 6% of Republicans who prior to the scandal said they're either undecided or opposed impeachment, who now were inclined to support it. So we have a little bit of change taking place. Second, we asked people how much they are following the information on the scandal. They read the conversation, are they following closely reports of it, and then tried to see who's more likely to support impeachment. And what we found is the better informed people were more in favor of impeachment, both among Republicans and Democrats. And so information seems to matter, not a huge amount, but as I said, if it tips the balance from 49-49 or 47-49 to 55, or 54 in some cases, then that's a big difference. So there is sensitivity to information. And I guarantee you that every Republican and Democrat is watching that public opinion needle to see if it's shifting. Because members of Congress who are Republican, the only thing that will sway them is if they see that their own constituency is shifting. And then they could turn against him and perhaps put an alternative on the table. That is nowhere near where we are now. And whether it's going to get there or not, that's another question. Now, with regard to that particular process, so what do we have? We have, in all probability, the House is going to impeach the president. That's almost a foregone conclusion. They already feel they have enough to impeach him, and that will pass. They have the votes. All you need is a majority, and they have a Democratic majority, and it's going to happen. Whether or not they get a single Republican to vote with them is not going to matter for the outcome. That will only matter for the appearances, but it wouldn't matter for the outcome. That's going to happen. You know, there are some people who suggest it might stretch a little bit longer and maybe then expand it to other issues beyond the Ukraine. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. But if that does happen, and they impeach before Christmas, then the Senate will take it up. And the Senate, if the Senate had to act today, there's no question that they would not remove the president. They would vote to acquit him. They have a majority Republican. And not only that, to the extent that public opinion is at play, and everybody's watching public opinion, and the House impeachment process persuaded a few people, not a lot, but a few people to shift against him. The question is the Senate, with a Republican majority, is the Senate going to be able to then put a different narrative to try to win public opinion back in the process of acquitting the president, which is almost inevitable unless some new revelations come out and it's possible because the story is still unfolding. But if the Senate had to take it up today, there's no question they would acquit him, and they would put something else on the table. So for that reason, I think the situation is still fluid pertaining to the outcome of impeachment on the election itself. Now, when you look at past the impeachment process and into the actual election post-primaries, particularly Democratic primaries with so many candidates on the table, the question then turns to who is going to be the Democratic candidate. Because as you know, yes, people are energized by Trump both ways. His supporters are energized by him for him, and Democrats are energized by him against him, meaning they are energized to vote against him. In fact, it's interesting, aside from the polling results about impeachment, we have seen actual election results that show that the president's influence is eroding a little bit. What have we seen recently? Well, certainly the midterm elections a year ago, the Democrats won the House. That's why we have an impeachment. They won the House from Republicans. That's a show that his influence declined. But recently we've had some other elections. We had an election in Virginia, a state that we have called historically purple, because sometimes it went Democrat, sometimes it went Republican. Now it's completely Democrat. The Democrats swept everything. They already controlled the governorship and the lieutenant governor. Now they control both houses. The state is completely Democrat. That's just the recent election. That's just a few weeks ago. And then in the South, there were elections in red states, Republican states, heavily red states, where Democrats, one Democratic candidate protected his governorship, even though the president campaigned against him in favor of the Republican candidate. And another Democratic candidate won an election, despite the president campaigning in favor of the Republican candidate heavily. And the president was seen to have lost that in red states. More interestingly in those states is that we have seen something we hadn't seen since the last election, which is President Trump and the Republicans did well in the 2016 election in rural areas and in suburban areas. And we have seen in this recent election signs that there's a softening of their support in rural areas and certainly in suburban areas. And so those are indications that something is in play. But of course, it's going to matter on who's going to be the Democratic candidate. Because Trump is not going to be just running against an abstract Democrat, but one of the candidates is going to be selected. And which one is it going to be? Now, I don't know who it's going to be for now. We know who the candidates are who are leading. Polls nationally, polls show, still Biden, Sanders, and Warren at the very top. And the mayor of Indiana, Buttigieg, has been leading in the two earliest primary states, Iowa and New Hampshire. I don't know which one is going to win. I think it's really anybody's guess at this point. But I want to say that Democrats are divided right now, not simply ideologically about which candidate really represents them more. I think all Democrats want is defeat Trump. There is not a single Democrat I talk to who doesn't say, I like X, but if Y is the Democratic candidate, I'm going to work my butt off to get him elected because I want to defeat Trump. So people are, in some ways the Democrats are energized against Trump, even though they might have favor. But they do have a philosophical agreement about what kind of candidate would best defeat Trump. And there are two prototypes, you might say. One theory is that you need a moderate candidate, like a Biden. Maybe Biden is not exciting, so that's one reason why the businessman, billionaire, Bloomberg has decided to run, because he thinks he fits that space of the center, more moderate Democrat who can appeal to some Republicans and appeal to some independents. That's one theory. One theory is that people who are way to the left, like Bernie Sanders or Warren, are not likely to be able to reach out to the middle. But there is another theory. And I have to say I'm even closer to that theory, which is the next election is going to be about turnout. It's going to be a turnout election. And yes, that it's going to be a turnout election, the next election. What do I mean by a turnout election? It's going to depend on who's going to be able to turn out the vote. Are the Democrats going to turn out in large numbers, or Republicans are going to turn out in large numbers? Who's going to be energized more? And that's going to make the difference. Trump energized his voters last time. The Democrats did not. And many of Bernie Sanders' supporters last time, they said they're all alike about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They don't say that now. But they did say that. Some of them stayed home and did not vote for Hillary Clinton. And if Democrats had voted in the same percentages as they turned out for Barack Obama, the Democrats would have won the election. Is it turnout is really central. And this time, the key for the Democrats is to be able to energize their base, because the numbers are on their side. There are far more Democrats than Republicans, and independents are leaning the Democratic way right now. So if they can energize the voters, they will win. Now, remember, by winning, I am saying they will win the presidency, but remember, public opinion or even the national polls don't tell you the story in full. Why is that? Because we know last time Hillary Clinton won the national vote by almost 2 million people margin over Donald Trump, and he still won the presidency. And he won it because of a few states who were swing states that he won by fewer than 80,000 votes. And that's all that mattered for the Electoral College for him to become president. So it's still going to be really a matter of those swing states and who's going to win them, and whether or not there will be a high turnout among Democrats, especially minorities, African Americans and Hispanics who would be energized. And there are some Democrats who say all Democrats will be energized because Trump alone is energizing them. And by the way, we found that in the South in the recent election for governorship. One theory was that before Trump infused himself into the election of governorship in Louisiana, Kentucky, and so forth, it was a local election. People were voting for the Democrat not because they're anti-Trump, but because they thought they were doing a good job or they would do a good job. But when Trump went there, it became about Trump. It actually worked against him because instead of energizing the Republicans, he actually energized the Democrats, turn out in large numbers to defeat the Republican candidate. So fascinating story about what might happen or unfold. So energizing voters is critical. And therefore, when Democrats are looking for who should represent them, they're looking in part about who's going to be able to energize the voters, especially minority voters, to turn out in large numbers to vote. One final point, and then I'll open it for a conversation about foreign policy. Now, I said just in the opening that foreign policy really is not a big story in the election. I mean, right now, it's kind of almost sad. I don't know how many of you have been turning on anything to do with American news, because even CNN here, it's CNN International, not CNN that we have there. If you watch CNN or if you watch MSNBC or Fox, it's all about domestic politics and impeachment and Trump and Democrats and Republicans, and you might get a few headlines every once in a while that nobody's paying attention to related to the rest of the world. So the rest of the world is kind of a side story for now because the U.S. isn't in an imminent war or crisis to deal with. This could change. One of the things that is clear is that Americans, for one thing, don't want to be dragged into another war. And notice that Donald Trump, with all of his, verbal attacks and economic measures against Iran, did not respond militarily when apparently the Iranians were behind, one way or the other, directly or indirectly, an attack on the Saudi oil fields. Or at least the U.S. accused them of so, that the U.S. thought, or the American public believed, that the Iranians were behind the attack on Saudi Arabia. He did nothing. And that is not just because of his instinct that he doesn't want to be dragged into war. That is because the American public is adamantly opposed to it. In fact, in our poll, I did one before the attack and after the attack on Saudi oil fields, 75% of Americans, majorities of both Republicans and Democrats and independents, every segment, didn't want a military response. They don't want to take the chance of the U.S. being dragged into another war in the Middle East. And even I followed up with a question saying, what if in fact we have absolute proof that Iran carried out those attacks on the oil fields, and a majority of all Americans, including a majority of Republicans, said, still, we don't want a military response. So the military, there is something interestingly over which Americans are actually unified. And if something happens that drags America in, certainly it could shift, it could change. I could say more about the policy toward Israel-Palestine later in the question and answer. I don't want to mention that here, but I want to mention one other thing, the economy. The economy, of course, is always a central issue in almost every election. When it's bad, it reflects badly on the president. When it's good, it reflects well on the president. Now the economy is good. Of course, it could go bad between now and next November. It could hurt him. But the economy is not as central an issue as people think right now. Let me tell you why. If you look at the macro level, the economy was doing very well when Obama left office. In fact, I urge you to look at the economic trend. The trajectory of the American economy, when Obama came, it was down after the Bush years, and then it started going up the second year of Obama, and it kept going up straight line through the next 6 years of Obama, and then it continued going up the same line through the Trump years, the same exact line. It was actually trajectory going up, starting exactly the same. And so it should have theoretically helped Hillary. It was a Democratic president who, in a way, saved the economy from what it was. It was doing well. There was no real big issue that you could call a central failure of Democrats in the economy. And yet, it didn't really have as much of an impact. And now it's the same. Why? Because I think it's a little bit distorting. Because when we talk about the economy, we're talking about the macro picture. However, as we had seen in the debate in 2016, when not only Trump did well among Republicans, but Bernie Sanders did well among Democrats, they basically were anti-establishment candidates. And they were saying that the economy looks good, but it's not good for the poorer people. The gap is growing between the rich and poor, and the rich can't catch up. The American dream is no longer within reach. That argument was made in 2016, and I think it is being made now. And so whether it's swayed one way or the other is not going to be a function so much of the economy being successful. It'll help Trump a little bit, but it's not going to sway public. It's not going to, of course, it'll hurt him more if it goes worse, but the impact will be marginal. And with that, I'll stop and open it for a conversation.
Thank you, Shibli. I think you've demonstrated to us that even though we have chosen a very simple title for this talk, the U.S. elections, that this is a very complex, multi-layered issue, and I think you've laid out a lot of that complexity for us to discuss. Now, all elections, all U.S. presidential elections are important. U.S. presidential elections have consequences. But this particular election seems to be, let's say, more consequential than others. And I think you've pointed that out in what you mentioned about the degree of severe political polarization that exists. And I think what you said, that this is really unprecedented. I mean, it's something that pollsters have not seen. And so I wonder if I could probe you a little bit in terms of how that polarization is playing out in the political debate, in the narrative on both sides. And it seems to be a very interesting distinction between the Republican narrative and the Democratic narrative. The Republican narrative is purely partisan, as you mentioned. They like Trump because they like being in power. They like the political gains that accrue from being in power, the Supreme Court judges, the federal judges, the tax cuts. So they like the policy positions that were enacted under Trump, even though they may have reservations on his character, some of his policies, and so on. The Democratic narrative seems to be almost existential. It's not that Democrats look at Trump as a bad president. It's not that they obviously disagree with his policy positions. No, but they see in Trump a danger to the integrity of U.S. political institutions and the integrity of U.S. democracy itself. And so the debate is framed almost in existential terms. And I wonder if you can give us a sense, to what degree do people share that view? I mean, is it just the debate among the political establishment, or do ordinary Americans believe that Trump is somehow constitutes an actual danger to the U.S. political system? And if I could press you, what is your own view on that?
First, I think that it's not just the Democratic elites or members of Congress. I think it is the Democrats broadly. They see Trump as posing a serious threat to democracy and the American way. And there are, frankly, a lot of others. Certainly you would hear that privately, but not publicly because of the fear factor or because of the instrumental factor argument. You hear that. What's happening in some ways is really unusual because when we have never really had a test of the executive power in America the way we're having now. We never even realized that a president can get away with so much because no president has ever tested the powers the way this president is testing the powers, where essentially he can disregard any particular bureaucracy or political appointee, and even the military, as what happened recently, just yesterday, with regard to one of the Navy SEALs, a decision that he makes that led ultimately to the firing of Secretary of the Navy, who obviously wanted to protect the values of the institution. So we are having a lot of testing being done. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and we're going to see the extent to which the power of the president is absolute. We're seeing this with regard to the arguments that are being presented by the president's lawyers in courts, which say not only a president cannot be criminally charged while he's president, so literally he can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, but that he can't even be investigated for crimes by anyone. This is being tested as we speak in the courts. If he, in fact, is found to have those kind of powers, I think we'll discover, we cease to be a republic anymore. I mean, it would be, the closest thing to a monarchy. And I think I fear for it, for sure. But I think it's regardless of, as you know, I've advised both Republican and Democratic presidents before. I've respected, I can disagree with someone and still respect them. But this is a highly unusual situation. Now, how do Republicans, then support that? It's fascinating because I don't want to speak for them, and I'm just telling you, I give you two theories about the Republican members of Congress, where some of them do it because they like the benefits, some of them do it because of the fear. But what about the public? What about his base, people who support him? I think they buy into the narrative, and I'm not surprised about that. That's narrative wars are always like that. People buy into it. I have my way of checking facts. People have a different way of checking facts. It's not shocking, but it is frustrating for those of us who have a way of checking facts. A different way of checking facts. The fascinating story here is the arguments that is being used in debate, to go back to your original question, is not just the Democrats are saying this is an existential argument, but let's take the Ukraine case, okay? So where you have the president saying about his conversation with the Ukrainian president, there's nothing wrong with it, it's perfect, it's beautiful. And of course, most Republicans don't want to be there because they read it and they don't think it's perfect or beautiful, and they think there's something wrong with it. So they would rather go with the following argument. They would rather say, it's not a perfect, he made a mistake, he should not have said that, but this is not impeachable. This doesn't, rise to the level of impeachment. You hear that somewhat in the debate, but the president is not allowing him to say that. Because any senator who goes and says, this is not a perfect, conversation, they fear him coming after them. So they're forced to put artificial argument on the table that they don't actually believe. And that's really where the debate becomes problematic, because they don't even believe what they're saying anymore. They just say it.
Before I turn to our audience, if I could ask you about the divisions on the Democratic side. So you mentioned the electorate is polarized, the very deep divisions between Republicans and Democrats. But on the Democratic side, there seems to be a silent, it's much more than a debate, it's a silent political contest over the future of the Democratic Party between the progressive left and the more centrist establishment Democrats. And turning to the dynamics that, as you mentioned about the elections, that this will be a turnout elections. And there seems to be concern that if the Democrats drift too much to the left, they will lose a significant portion of the center. And so the turnout, while they will be able to turn out the base, it will not be enough to win the election. And if I recall correctly, that there was that was a concern expressed by Barack Obama on a number of occasions, warning subtly the Democratic Party not to turn too much to the left. How much of that do you think is actually or will be a deciding factor in the elections?
I think there is that divide for sure between a moderate branch, moderate meaning more centrist branch of the Democratic Party and one that is far more to the left. And it's visible, but frankly, it's less visible at the popular level of the Democratic Party than it is in the differences between the establishment Democrats and the grassroots Democrats. I have always felt that the base of the Democratic Party has moved far more to the left than the establishment elected officials. We see that on a lot of issues, including Israel-Palestine, that's most visible, where Democrats are way more conservative than their constituents, and the only reason that has been sustainable is that those issues have not been front and center as a priority issue for the grassroots politics, and so we see that there is a tactical debate. Part of it is profound ideological debate, but part of it is tactical debate, is that I suggested earlier, which is, do you put someone who energizes the base knowing the base is more progressive? It is more progressive. And the numbers show that it is more progressive. Or do you try to reach out to few Republicans, few independents to win? And that's the centrist argument. It's a legitimate debate, and we're going to see more of it in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Shibli. Let me open it up to our audience. I would ask, please, if you could keep your questions and or comments brief. And as Professor Talhami mentioned, you can pose your questions in English or Arabic. Let me start with Dean Fahmy. And maybe we could take a round of 3 or 4 questions and then bring it back to Shibli.
Shibli, I've been following American elections for some time now. There's always a personal element in the elections, but I think, frankly, in this upcoming one, it is almost completely personal. Those who like Trump and those who don't like Trump, and in that case, if the alternative as a person is a better alternative. But I want to push you a little bit. Is what's happening here about Trump or about America? I mean, Trump was elected, and when he gave his first speech in Washington, he basically criticized everybody, public, the establishment, or everybody in Washington, with no distinction. Before Trump, you correctly said, Hillary's campaign with Bernie Sanders, he gave her a hard time, even though he's way off on the left of the Democratic Party. Even Obama's election, Obama was a political cadre, that's true, but at the end of the day, he was an African American coming in, and he won the nomination against Hillary, who was a typical. So my question really here is, did Trump join the constituency, or did the constituency join Trump? Is America becoming much more local, if you want, much more interested in its own affairs, much less interested in playing a leadership role? Because all three, well, actually three presidents, the second term of Bush, and then Obama, and now Trump, they have been shrinking in terms of their readiness to exercise power beyond their borders. So my question really is, Trump will come and go, whether you do it in 4 years or 8 years, they'll pass. We're 7,000 years old, so we'll live with that. But essentially, is America shifting away from the world or not? That's really a more important question for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Hassouna?
Thank you, Shibli, for your analysis. It's always good to see you in Cairo after knowing you for so many years in Washington. I have two questions. You have been relying in your analysis and perception mainly on polling public opinion. So have others, like John Zogby, for instance, or even the Gallup polls and so on. But to what extent is the polling accurate? Because I remember in the last presidential elections between Clinton and Bush and Trump, the outcome was not really predicted in a way. So how do you think that polling can be accurate and can really project the future outcome? The second question I have, you mentioned that the next elections will depend to a great extent on the turnout of minorities like the African Americans and the Latins. What about other minorities like the Arab Americans, the Jewish minority? And I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on the position of those other minorities. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the gentleman here in the front row.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Three quick questions. First one, you mentioned that Trump is very popular with many people in America. He is also popular among some of the rulers in the Middle East, in the Gulf. He is very popular among the rulers in the Middle East, some of them in the Gulf and in Egypt. So if a democratic administration comes to power, what would happen in Arab-American relations? Will there be an earthquake, revenge? Secondly, there is now a big issue happening between Egypt and the United States regarding buying Russian Sukhoi 35. Why is this happening? Because they see that American weapons have failed in Yemen, and they have failed in protecting the Aramco. And so many rulers in the area, many armies are looking for Russian weapons. If Egypt buys the Russian planes, is America serious in putting punishment on Egypt? And lastly, when Trump talked about draining the swamp, is the swamp now draining Trump?
Is the swamp what?
Draining Trump, the deep state, is the swamp winning and he is failing?
Shibli, you want to take a crack at those?
Sure,
There's a lot to digest
Let me
there.
start with Ambassador Fahmi's broader question about how America is changing. And I think it's an important one because, frankly, if you look back at the time when Trump won, the original analysis was that he was appealing to an anti-establishment mood that emerged in America that is nationalist, perhaps with white nationalism, but that kind of was suffering from the outcome of globalization, alienation. And America First was really kind of the shorthand to capture some of that. And in some ways, if you want to look at it, you can look at and see that this is a trend that has been global up to a point, right? You know, the rise of Brexit in the UK, ultra-nationalism places like Poland or Italy or other places. So so there is something about that is there. And in fact, I have to say that we were among the few who wrote, meaning me and a colleague of mine in our program, who wrote 2 weeks before the US election an article in Reuters based on a poll that we've done, in which we argued, I know, the polls show Hillary will win, including ours, but here's why Trump could win. And part of it is we tease out some of those anti-establishment data about where the public really wants a complete outsider to kind of, shake the whole system. And that Trump was a representative of mood, just like Bernie Sanders was a representative of mood in the Democratic Party. And I think that hasn't gone away in the sense that there's a little bit of that still there, where people really want the system shook up, but I don't think this is what they expected. Some expected it, but a lot didn't expect this, and I think, it's going to be interesting to see how this works itself out. I happen to think that there's still a little bit of that in the system, and Democrats still have to appeal to the candidate. But here's an interesting thing that happened. So even on this issue of America First, so Trump is running on America First, make America great. This is where his constituency is. That's what he says. Now, I have been testing in our polling American identity from 2015 when he started running through now to see what happened with American identity. And guess what happened? Fewer people say I'm America First now than they said in 2015. In fact, what's interesting is not only has American identity declined since 2015, but it has declined among Republicans as well as Democrats. Now, among Democrats, it has declined partly in reaction to Trump, and so Trump is anti-global. They say I'm a citizen of the world first. Almost half of the, almost as many people say I'm American first as I'm a citizen of the world first among Democrats. But among Republicans, what happened was that there was a slight dip in American identity in favor of religious identity because he's empowered the religious groups. So you have more people say, I'm Christian first, as opposed to I'm American first. Now that's a segment of the public. By the way, I'm writing a book on evangelicals. So I'm focused on the evangelical right, and it's called Evangelicals, Politics in Israel. So I'm dealing with that issue. I've been studying them. They're still supporting him, but for different kinds of reasons. Not because he's shaken up the system, but because he's given them everything they're asking for, everything they've ever asked for. So, so I'm not seeing exactly the same thing that we're feeling in 2016. I'm seeing it differently, but I do agree with you that there's at least a little bit of that everybody's going to have to pay attention to. Now, with Ambassador Hassouna about public opinion. Now, in fact, public opinion polls were exactly on the money last election. They predicted that Hillary Clinton would win by 2 percentage points, and she won by 2 percentage points. But those were national polls. And where they didn't do as well were the local polls in some states, and they started realizing that late. Hillary started discovering that she was getting behind in Michigan and rushed through last minute and spent much time there to spend time in these places, and it was too late. So it wasn't that the polls were wrong. It is the polls were mostly, including the ones I'm giving you now, they're all national. I'm not doing state-by-state poll. And they tend to be pretty accurate. And the recent polls, by the way, pertaining to those governorships in the South, they were pretty much on the money, very much on the money, within, half a percentage point. So that's not the big issue here. Now, with minorities, the particular minorities I mentioned are significant size minorities. Arab Americans are very small. They will make a difference in some states like Michigan. And historically, Arab Americans were some Republicans, some Democrats, sometimes swayed one way or the other. They were not always in one camp. Now, for a lot of reasons, they're more and more Democrat because of what they see as anti-Islamic Islamophobia and everything else that has come out of that. Not all. There's still a lot of Republican Arabs. That's the case. With Jewish Americans, they're also not a significant part of the population, but they're clustered, so they make a difference in places like Florida and New York. In New York, it wouldn't make a difference because it's a Democratic state. It doesn't matter. American Jews, despite the fact that Trump is seen to be pro-Israel, he's actually not pro-Israel. Most American Jews don't see him as being pro-Israel. They see him as being pro-right-wing Israel that they oppose, pro-settlement Israel, which they oppose. And, the vast majority of American Jews are Democrat. They have voted against Trump. And the most recent polls show that they're more anti-Trump than the rest of the American population. And they will still vote Democrat. You have a minority pro-Trump Republican Jews who obviously contribute a lot, represented by people like Sheldon Adelson, who give a lot of money to the campaign. The campaign contributions matter a lot. But the vote, that's not going to be an issue for Trump. Now, Asian Americans and Indian Americans have shifted more and more toward the Democrat Party, much more than the Republican Party. They'll turn out, but again, their numbers are small. Evangelicals, obviously most of them in the Republican Party, 75% of them, and they have been probably the strongest supporters of Donald Trump, and there is no reason to think that he's lost any because he's essentially given them everything that he asked for. With regard to Trump popularity in the Middle East, for sure. I think even now, I think in part a lot of people are disappointed with Obama, particularly in the Gulf. They felt that he was too, showed too much deference to Iran. They thought he was going to, go to Asia, tilt to Asia, and so forth. He didn't have a personal rapport with him like American presidents typically do with Middle Eastern leaders, dating back to his very first visit to Saudi Arabia. So in that sense, I think they still probably think he's better than Hillary would have been, but they're also disappointed with him. And I was, just back from the Gulf. Ambassador Fahmy was there as well at a conference. And it's, you can sense that he's not what they expected. He's been friendly to them on some issues, but certainly on Iran. I think, for example, the attack on the Saudi oil field was a wake-up call. Not only, nobody could stop the attack or even predict it was going to happen or even see it until it happened, but nobody reacted to it. And this is the oil fields. 50% production went out, overnight. So I think there's a shift. There's a shift in strategy. Not that a love for Democrats in the U.S. I think that's not likely to happen. Frankly, if I were to advise Middle Eastern leaders, I would say, it's not your issue to play in American politics. You have to deal with what you have to deal with. America is a big power, and whoever gets elected, you're going to have to deal with them and figure out a way to deal with them. But it certainly is not. He has not turned out the way they had expected. With the swamp, there's no question right now that that's not a theme that is easy to make in the current election.
Thank you. The gentleman here.
I have 3 questions. We are very much also living in a very polarized society currently in Egypt, and apparently polarization helping very much the ruler. So do you agree or disagree if we assume that the American moral value is declining, especially with the current polarization? This is the first question. Second question, assuming that Joe Biden will be the candidate who will run against Trump in the summer, and Ukraine decided that they are going to investigate his son. Is this going to weakening Joe Biden and boost the image of Trump? And then the third question, which is very much similar, most of the world autocrats, leaders are very much favoring Trump. And if Trump managed to sign some sort of economic agreement with China and other country in the summer, also during the election, do you think this will boost his image and is going to be re-elected? So those are the three questions. Thank you.
Thank you. There's the gentleman behind you.
Thanks, Karim. My name is Mohammed Qasim, and thank you, Professor Talhami, for a great presentation. My question is, you said the foreign policy does not show until now on the election. However, my question to you is, Trump is an American phenomenon, or is he a part of a bigger worldwide phenomena that promotes populists and show us a kind of leaders that we have not seen before? Is this a response to the failure of the liberal and democratic system around the world? Are we going to see something like what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed and Mr. Fukuyama said this is the end of history? Are we going to see the collapse of the democracy and liberalism?
Thank you. And then the gentleman at the back row there.
Does the result of the American election affect the world trade between China and US, or it's an institutional stand from USA?
So can you repeat the question again?
Does the result of American election affect the war, the trade war between China and USA?
The trade war between
the result of election
China
affect,
and the United
it will
States.
change the stand, the war between China and the USA.
Right.
And the bullying on Gulf state in the Trump era, it will continue after the election, or it change. You know that he imposed in Gulf state to pay. If you don't pay, it will not protect you, and a lot of political situation around that.
Thank you.
So first of all, on the question on polarization, I think yes. I think in some ways it's really fascinating to see how this polarization has become regional. It's like you're either with me or against me, and nothing in between. And it's become a political strategy, a survival strategy. So rulers, they will create an enemy, and they don't want somebody to be in between for the public, and they put the choice. Not that it's a new tactic, but it's visible in a variety of places, including in the region where it's they put these choices with nothing in between. Now, are American values in decline? I think that, let's put it this way. If you had an international party wanting to make a mockery of the American democracy, they could not have done a better job than they have been doing over the past couple of years. And I'm not suggesting that's a function of an international party, but if somebody was going to kind of make America look bad, or make America look not value-driven, or make American democracy look bad, they could not have done a better job than what we see now. And that's why I think a lot of people are fearful for the future of our democracy. So whether it's a decline of values or not, I think remains to be seen. As an immigrant who arrived in America when I was 18, with $150 in my pocket and a one-way ticket, arriving alone to go through the school system and make it and be accepted with open arms and have opportunities and be accepted despite my ethnic background and be embraced and be given the opportunity to reach the highest heights that I could reach. I am very proud of the values that embraced me, but I'm very fearful that those same values now are under threat, and I think a lot of people are. And I want to believe that the values are stronger. This is a cycle that we will overcome. I really strongly believe that deep in my heart. I think that despite the assault on institutions, the institutions will survive, and we will overcome. And that is, I don't know whether I'm saying that in terms of wishful thinking or not, but I think it's more than wishful thinking. With regard to you would ask a question about the weapons systems in the Middle East. I don't think about such a thing about Russian weapons being superior to Americans. In fact, I think that I am not a weapons expert, but I'm close to a lot of people who are weapons experts in institutions and think tanks that I deal with. And I don't think anybody wants to go against American jets in the world. I don't think that what has been proven is that American weapons are inferior. What has been proven over the past, not just with this war, but with the Afghanistan war and the Iraq war and everything else, that the conflicts that we face in the region cannot be resolved by military force. It doesn't matter how powerful you are or how superior your weapons are. That's not what we're facing, and it's wrong to think that these could be resolved that way. Now, Russia will exploit it. I don't blame them. They will play, you know, they will pose it that way, and they'll sell their weapons system, and they're doing a good job of it. That's not a surprise, but I don't think that's the issue. I don't think it's about, you know, whose weapons are more superior in this particular case. With Biden, obviously no one knows how this primary will be elected. I happen to think that he's probably not going to be the candidate, personally. But I have to say that he proved to be more robust than a lot of people expected early on. He's still getting large numbers. In some polls, he's still leading nationally. And so I wouldn't write him off. But I don't expect that he would be the candidate for not so much because of his age or because of how he's sounding. I happen to know him well. I respect him. He's a very thoughtful guy. He's got a lot of experience. But I think that he's not where the energy in the Democratic Party is right now. And so I think it would be somebody else. With regard to his son, let me tell you what I know, just so that we could put that out there. His son obviously benefited from being a son of a vice president, being appointed on the committee. He did nothing illegal, by the way. Nobody has found anything illegal, but it is part of what we call the swamp, in a sense that, you know, this happens all too often, and, you know, Trump's children are benefiting, and everybody's families often benefits of friends or connection. It's not partly surprising. It's, you know, it's ethically questionable, but it's not illegal. But what is clear is that Biden himself has been investigated with regard to his role in removing the Attorney General in the prosecutor in Ukraine, and there was no connection between that and his son, because what he was doing, he was actually being instructed. He wasn't doing it on his own. This was American policy. This was Obama policy. This was the European Union policy. This was the UN policy. This guy was seen to be a corrupt prosecutor standing in the way of democratization and reform in Ukraine. And so he was implementing that. Nobody found any direct connection between that and his son being appointed there, even though you can raise ethical questions about his son. So whether or not the Republicans succeed in turning this at least into a show that could hurt him, I think they probably could. I happen to think that that insinuation has hurt him and is likely to hurt him more the more it is in the public eye. Whether there's anything to it legally or even ethically is not going to matter, because it's just going to become part of the discourse. Final point was on autocrats favoring Trump. Yeah, I think I understand that up to a point, in the sense that Trump he likes what he calls strong men, unusually men, because I don't see him, supporting strong women. And one of them in our country has taken him on big time, Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader. But he obviously hasn't made democracy an issue for him. And he has shied away from going after people even for violations of human rights. And even in our case, even at home, this issue that happened to be in relation to the Navy SEAL, who were basically being disciplined by the Navy for violating rules and things that could be could be considered the human rights arena, where he wanted to overrule them over that. So I think I understand that, and I don't think that's likely to change. And certainly, if there is a Democrat president, doesn't matter who it is going to be, they're likely to be far more outspoken on democracy and human rights. That's going to happen. But I don't think anyone is in the mood of intervention. So they might pitch that, they might make that a statement, they might maybe push that on the margins, but no one really now believes that America can remake any country around the world. That is a mood now that is both Democrat and Republican.
I think we have time at least for one more round, but before we turn to the audience, I was wondering if I could take you back to the issue of culture and identity. Because as you've mentioned, Trump plays on the cultural divides and on issues of identity. And it seems to me the reason he's so successful, as you mentioned, is that there are very deep questions about who is an American, about American identity. And I was wondering if you can attempt to explain what you see as the root causes of that, because I think for non-Americans, it may be actually difficult to understand how is it that in the world's only superpower that there are these issues of identity, even though this is a very well-established political system. The United States Constitution has been the longest standing of any democracy. And so how is it that people are still debating who is an American?
I think this, some of it is not new in the sense that while there was no question that the majority of Americans felt American first historically, and including in our polling over the years about American identity, there was always some people who felt particularly global identity was expanding, particularly among millennials. We've seen that, people who are more plugged into the rest of the world, who feel their identity is more with the rest of the world than religious identity was always there, perhaps even the third biggest identity overall. People who feel that they define themselves by their religion first, not surprising. Like we ask here in the Arab world, are you, you all, if you're Egyptian, you're an Egyptian, you're an Arab, and you're either Muslim or Christian, and you're a citizen of the world. You're all these things. It's not like you're only one of those things. It's a question of which one do you favor more, which one do you feel strongest about, which one is the priority for you in acting in the world. For Americans, being American was certainly the trumping identity, and it still is across the board, except now among Democrats, it's almost evenly split with global identity. Now, what is new here, however, is that we're going into this unbelievable questioning of Americans, in some cases who were born in America, but they come from immigrant parents. What we've seen is this delegitimation of loyal Americans like this, Army man Vindman from the White House, who fought in war for America, who's served his country, and we're questioning, or people are questioning, whether they're legitimate Americans. Fiona Hill, who testified, who was born in the UK, she's a naturalized citizen. She has a British accent. After she and Vindman testified, a prominent Republican commentator said, now bring some real Americans to testify. Those are people, Fiona Hill, she was the chair of the National Intelligence Council for Europe in the US. She ran that operation. She was Trump's advisor on Russia in the White House with top secret clearances, the likes of which Trump's own appointees couldn't qualify for. To this day, they haven't qualified for, including his son-in-law, which to this day has not received the highest top secret clearance. He didn't qualify for. So that kind of questioning is extraordinary. We have not seen it in the past. This is new, and this is troubling, and a lot of people are really, really worried about what would happen if we allow this discourse to take hold.
Yeah. We have the gentleman in the back.
ممكن أسأل سؤالي بالعربي؟
اتفضل.
أفضل؟ طيب. في ترجمة ولا؟
لا لا اتفضل. لا مش محتاج ترجمة. اتفضل.
أوكي. أنا اسمي محمود إبراهيم، محامي وبشتغل في الحملات الانتخابية، وشاركت في الانتخابات الأمريكية مرتين. مرة في 2012 كان عندي منحة في الحزب الجمهوري في فيرجينيا، والمرة الثانية كنت موجود في واشنطن ونيويورك خلال انتخابات ترامب، وحضرت الانتخابات والإناجريشن كمتابع ومهتم بالموضوع. يعني فيما يخص الجمهوريين، أنا أعتقد أن الجمهوريين ورا ترامب كلهم باختلافات بسيطة يعني، وأعتقد أنه بول راين من أول يوم نجح فيه ترامب قال أنه هو كان شايف صح، إحنا شايفين غلط، وفي حتى الترامبيزم عند نيوت جيرنيتش. الديمقراطيين على العكس مختلفين تماما، والنجاح أنا بس بوصل لده أنه النجاح اللي بيحققوه في اللوكل ده لأنه هيلاري على مدار 10 سنين ربت كوادر بتشتغل انتخابات وبتعرف تنجح، وفي الحقيقة هي صرفت قد اللي صرفه ترامب او قد اللي صرفه الجمهوريين في الحملتين بتوعها، يساوي مثلا الضعف. ما بين 2008 كان عندها حملة قوية جدا ضد أوباما، وثم حملة أوباما، ثم حملتها هي في 2016. فهي عندها كوادر بتعرف تكسب الانتخابات، اللي هم الديمقراطيين اللي اتربوا في كده. لكن ما اعتقدش انه ده مؤشر، لانه هنا بقى السؤال اللي انا عايز اساله لحضرتك، انه هل الديمقراطيين المنقسمين بهذا الشكل بيعبروا عن الطبقة الوسطى الأمريكية، ولا بيعبروا عن الأقليات داخل الطبقة الوسطى الأمريكية؟ أنا أتصور إنه اللي شايفه خطاب، حتى المثال اللي لسه مذكور عن الهجرة، إنه هل الهجرة حق ولا ميزة؟ فإنه الديمقراطيين بيتعاملوا مع الهجرة على إنها حق للناس، والجمهوريين والطبقة الوسطى أتصور إنها بتتعامل إنها ميزة. ده السؤال، إنه السياسة كيف بيعبر الحزب الديمقراطي في اللحظة دي عن الطبقة الوسطى أم عن الأقليات داخل الطبقة الوسطى؟ السؤال الثاني، هل اللي بيحصل ده، لأنه ابتديت أسمع نقاشات عن تغيير النظام الانتخابي الأمريكي، هل النقاشات دي ممكن يبقى ليها مستقبل، ممكن تبقى جادة؟ إنه الانتخابات، سمعت حد عن إنه المجمع الانتخابي ما يبقاش بالولايات، يبقى بالكاونتيز أو كذا أو كذا. فالمسألة هل في مستقبل لتغيير النظام الانتخابي الأمريكي؟ وميرسي جدا، شكرا.
خليني أبدأ في السؤال الثاني. السؤال الثاني، أنا بعتقدش يكون أي تغيير على المدى القصير في النظام الانتخابي الأمريكي، صعب جدا، ولا أرى ذلك أي وقت قريب، يعني مش وارد. بالنسبة للحزب الديمقراطي، الحزب الديمقراطي طبعا لا يعبر عن الطبقة الوسطى فقط، لأنه هناك طبعا طبقة وسطى بين الجمهوريين كمان، وطبقة عاملة حتى بين الجمهوريين. يعني الجمهوريين ليسوا كلهم أغنياء، نحن نعرف أن هذه طبعا قضية ثقافة حتى في بعض الولايات، ما نسميه بالولايات الحمراء والولايات الزرقاء. ولكن هناك بعض التوزيع الديموغرافي الواضح. يعني مثلا نرى أن الرجال البيض يؤيدون الحزب الديمقراطي أكثر بكثير من أي يعني جزء آخر من المجتمع، ونرى أن النساء تصوت الحزب الديمقراطي أكثر، ونرى أن نسبة الأقليات في الحزب الديمقراطي تزداد. من ذلك طبعا نسبة السود في الحزب الديمقراطي، نسبة الناس من أصل أمريكا اللاتينية بالذات، وأيضا نسبة حتى الأمريكان الآسيويين تزداد. وهذه الفئات طبعا لها نظرتها الخاصة بالنسبة للحلول الاجتماعية، منها قضية الضرائب وهي قضية فلسفية. الحزب الجمهوري يعارض الضرائب، الحزب الديمقراطي يؤمن بأن الضرائب تساعد على طبعا قوة الدولة لتوزيع الخدمات الاجتماعية، وهناك مسؤولية على الدولة أن تقدم مثل هذه الخدمات، وهذا طبعا سائد خاصة بين الأقليات التي بحاجة إلى هذه المساعدات الاجتماعية. فنرى هذه الخلافات بالنسبة للضرائب. الحزب الجمهوري بشكل عام يعني كما قلت يعارض الضرائب، وترامب طبعا نجح فهذا هو التوزيع الذي يتحدث عنه. ليس فترى مثلا عامل في الزراعة يؤيد الحزب الديمقراطي، وعامل في الزراعة يؤيد الحزب الجمهوري. والشيء الغريب طبعا حتى أن بعض هذه الفئات التي أيدت ترامب في 2016 وهي ليست من صلب الحزب الديمقراطي، إن كانت مستقلة أو في أحيان صوت الحزب الجمهوري، أيدت أوباما. يعني حتى أن بعض هذه الطبقات أيدت أوباما في ولايات مثل ولاية بنسلفانيا مثلا، وأيدت ترامب في 2016. يعني أيدت أوباما في السابق ثم أيدت ترامب. وهناك تساؤلات كيف ستصوت هذه الفئات التي يمكن أن تغير رأيها. في الانتخابات في الشهر الماضي التي في بداية هذا الشهر التي شهدناها في ولايات حمراء جمهورية، رأينا أن هناك بعض الانقلاب مرة أخرى. يعني بعض المناطق التي خارج المدن والتي أيدت ترامب في 2016 بدأت تنقلب على الحزب الجمهوري، ليس كلها ولكن بعضها. ونحن نتحدث طبعا عن حاجة إلى نسبة صغيرة لقلب المعادلة السياسية.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. The gentleman there.
معلش أنا هسأل برضو الدكتور الحامي بالعربي. يعني استمتعت بحضرتك برضو عن ازاي لاي حد الانقسام الامريكي او الاستقطاب اللي موجود في امريكا سوف يؤثر على فرص اللي هو ترامب في ان هو اعاده انتخابه. لكن انا ليا بصراحه راي بالنسبه للموضوع الامبيشمنت اللي بيحصل في امريكا. هو اي نعم يعني فانتاستيك للامريكان او للعالم وكده، لكن يعني الاقي حد بيدمر دول زي رئيس اوكرانيا هيتدمر مثلا، يعني تشويه سمعه رؤساء الدول واتهامهم بالفساد دون اي رد فعل من اوكرانيا. يعني اوكرانيا ما فيش حد بيرد خالص في الامبيشمنت خالص، لا هو بيقدر يدافع عن نفسه ولا حد موجود من اوكرانيا. فطبعا ده التاثيرات السلبيه للامبيشمنت مثلا. دي بالنسبه للسؤال اللي اريد برضو انا احب اسمع من حضرتك متخصص طبعا في الشرق الاوسط، عندك معلومات في الشرق الاوسط. يعني الازمه في الخليج، كان ترامب في الأول ضد قطر، حاليا مع أصبح الموقف يعني في عودة للتوازن أو انفراج أو كده. وأخيرا لمصر، احنا يعني بصراحة بنشوف في مصر بنستغرب، يعني احنا مش أكثر انقساما، أكثر امتعاضا من اللي بيحصل من أمريكا خالص. يعني بيدمر كل حاجة أو أي حاجة ممكن تتوقعها الناس. يعني احنا نتمنى أن ترامب ما ينجحش أصلا يعني على المستوى الشخصي. يعني شكرا.
Thank you. And the last question here, please.
Thank you very much for your talk. So you mentioned that polarization coalesces around Trump. For example, when you ask if people support Trump's immigration policy. In your polling, is polarization as deep around the policies themselves, or is it more around the person? So for example, if you asked about a specific policy such as refugee quotas without mentioning Trump, would you find the same level of polarization?
Good.
So, Shibli, if I could ask you to address these questions, but let me put a final question since we began to stray into the foreign policy issues. As you mentioned, foreign policy is not at the forefront of the elections. It's rarely a deciding factor unless there are extraordinary circumstances. But I think you and I know that there is a background conversation on foreign policy within the campaigns among the foreign policy specialists, among the think tanks, among a certain constituency of Republicans and Democrats. And they do talk about foreign policy. And I was wondering if you could give us your insight as to what is changing in that debate, given that Trump has really reflected a departure on foreign policy positions on so many issues, on American alliances, on defense commitments, on the issues of trade, on the issues of immigration, and so on. How is the foreign policy debate in both parties changing, or is it staying the same?
So I'll end with that question. Let me start with your question about refugees, so or any other question for that matter. So typically, when we do public opinion polls, we are extremely careful not to lead the public. So on issues when we're studying refugee questions, or we're studying even questions about Israel-Palestine, or about relations with Mexico, or any of those questions, or North Korea or Iran, we are careful not to invoke Trump's name. And to make it so that people are not saying, oh, this is Trump. We first of all, we want to know how much the public knows. Sometimes we ask some baseline question, and we make sure we don't lead them. So we put the substantive question to see where they are. Now, some questions you can't help it, because, like immigration, that is what we're talking about, and that's what Trump is talking about. So immediately they will think that way, whether you lead them or not. But on some issues, the gap isn't as wide between Democrats and Republicans. On refugees particularly, we actually, I invite you, since it sounds like you're following that issue, I invite you to go to our website at the University of the Sadat Chair website, which is sadat.umd.edu. Look at our studies. You will find in the past year that we've done an extensive study on refugees and American public attitudes on refugees. And you'll find that Americans are a little bit more open to helping refugees or accepting refugees than the political debate suggests when you probe them on specific issues, and that's good. Even on Israel-Palestine, where we know that some of the shift is partisan, meaning Trump likes Netanyahu, Democrats don't like Netanyahu. So Trump is being rough on the Palestinians. Democrats want to defend the Palestinians. So a little bit of that, definitely. But when we probe deeper, we find that Democrats are growing to be more sympathetic with the Palestinians regardless of Trump. It has to do with a worldview, with a value system. And I've written about that, and you will find that also in our information. You will find analysis of why that has taken place, separate from the polarization and that issue. Trump in the Middle East, Trump is Trump. It's very hard to categorize this as a philosophy. There is one thing, if you have to look at threads, and what are these threads? One thread is he doesn't want to be dragged into another war. And that has been obvious. He said that over and over again. He's showing he thinks that's a losing enterprise politically. He doesn't want to do it. Number two, he doesn't want to interfere internally in any state. This is not, he thinks state building is a losing enterprise. He doesn't want to do it. Number three, he likes to do business with people. And economic trade benefits to his constituency as he understands it. And some people argue even benefits to himself and his family down the road. But in addition to all of that, don't underestimate the Israel factor, because the Israel factor is huge to the extent that the president himself is involved in Middle East policy, he's involved in the margins. Most of it he's allocated to two men. One is his son-in-law, Kushner, and one is his ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. And their priority is a certain a deal pertaining to Israel that is much more in harmony with the Israeli right. And to the extent that they're interested in regional issues and creating regional alliances with Gulf states and anyone else, it is really a function of the instrumentality of that relationship to their worldview around the Israeli-Arab conflict. And that is really the way those priorities have been drawn. I don't think it has anything to do with Qatar and Saudi Arabia per se. I think that is an evolving situation. I think the president has had the view from the beginning that he prefers that the conflict with Qatar be settled. He said that before. He might have a preference over one or the other. And I think they've, you know, it wasn't a priority for them. That's why they didn't push it that much, but it's been a way that he's conceptualized it. And the Yemen war is, I don't think, frankly, he is the one who originally, you know, kind of given the yellow light at least to it. It happened under Obama. And it happened under Obama not because Obama supported the Yemen war, but because Obama wanted to protect the Iran nuclear deal and didn't want the Saudis to stand in the way and essentially look the other way when they went into Yemen. And now the U.S. finds itself where it finds itself on Yemen. Now, your broader question to end with, which is?
The debate that's happening
among the elites, yeah.
Among the elites.
Among the elites. So those of you who know anything about our politics know that when there is an election year, every big think tank in Washington starts thinking, maybe our guy will win the next time and we want to go into government. So they all start preparing recommendations for the next president. I have to say I've been part of some of that where, you know, the think tanks prepare a proposal for the next president on foreign policy, in some cases not knowing who it's going to be. So there is a whole debate about what do we want our policy toward the Middle East be, toward Asia, toward North Korea. And so sometimes it's party clustered where Democrats who are out of office now are all working to see what they want to put forth. Sometimes Republicans, sometimes just think tanks that are bipartisan who try to put these things. So there is a debate, as you know, Kareem suggested, that's in a way independent from Trump. Doesn't matter who's going to happen, but they're posing. So how has that taken place? Is this different? Let me tell you one characteristic that is really different, that everybody feels marginalized, like experts don't matter anymore, that they're demoralized, that it's harder to get people to come into the room anymore. Because people say we don't make a difference anymore because political appointees are coming, ideologues are coming, and we're being not listened to. So you hear that. But still people are writing things. And people are writing things along the lines that you might expect. Not in the sense of Republicans preparing a Trumpian worldview, because nobody really knows what that is in a way. So it's closer to a traditional view. So in the preparation of those documentations, I think you find roughly a traditional preparation of views, not so much dramatically different, but with an eye to kind of counter Trump in some way, or not be too much against Trump if you're on the Republican side. So that's a factor, but not really affecting the way this is taking place as far as I could see.
On behalf of the School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at AUC, I want to express my profound appreciation to you, Shibli, for taking the time to talk to us tonight. You've never failed to illuminate these very complex issues for us. And let me just say before closing, given the importance of the upcoming elections, this event will be just one in a series of activities that we as a school will be conducting on analyzing the US elections, the implications of these elections for US foreign policy in general and for the Middle East in particular. And we will be organizing these activities throughout the coming year. So we very much hope that you can find time to join us again to lend your voice to that debate. Please join me in thanking Professor Talhami for what I thought was a very insightful discussion.